go, Trojans go. LBC pouring Cardinal and gold. The next man up is the next Heisman. Only bleed USC, yes, we've been built to win. Catch roses while we ball all across the map. Too strong, fight on as Trojan Talk on tap.
Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Trojans Talk on Tap. I am your host, Rick Anaya. So glad that you are joining us this evening. Got a jam-packed show. Going to preview the national championship tomorrow night, Washington and University of Michigan. And pleased to have on, I'm going to introduce the panel. First up, we've got former player with the University of Michigan. I want to introduce Keith Mitchell. Keith Mitchell played tight end under Bo Schembechler in the late 80s. And Keith also is the founder of an NIL business called Playbooked. And Keith, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for having me, my man.
Cool. We're going to introduce a couple other guys on the panel. We've got Brandon Jones and Blackie Chan from Light the Torch podcast, the USC podcast. If you haven't checked these guys out, they've been doing it this season. Fantastic show. Check them out at Light the Torch podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Great. And I'm going to add right now, we got Tony Altimore. Tony Altimore is going to be joining us a little bit later. And he's going to help me preview the University of Washington versus Michigan. And Tony will be back in a little bit. Great to have you as well, Tony. So, gentlemen, Keith, welcome to the show. You've got to be ecstatic. I know that you've played in a couple of Rose Bowls. You actually, I think, beat USC. Was it the 89 Rose Bowl?
Yeah, it was 89 Rodney Peete years.
Yeah, Rodney Peete years. So tell us about how I take it you weren't at the game, but you were watching from home or from another location.
I was at the game. Last week, I was at home.
Okay, you're at home. Right.
Yeah, I was at home with the house full of people, and my son and all his buddies all just staring at that last play. What's going to happen? You know what's funny about that game is going into that game,
yeah,
I had no idea what was going to – I couldn't have predicted anything. I had no guess. No idea. Halftime of that game, still no idea how this is going to turn out. Still no clue. With a minute to go in the game, same thing. Had no idea. And it just worked out in our favor. And that's just the way the ball bounces, man. We were due.
How did that feel when the game is over and you've had that feeling being in the Rose Bowl and coming out the victor? What was going through your head?
Well, it's different. Back then, it's a whole different climate now. Now they still got another game to play. Now just winning the Rose Bowl, back then it was everything.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, we won the Rose Bowl. Come back. There's people waiting in the airport and everything like that. Now it's just another game unless it's in the playoff. So next year, I'm super excited about next year with 12 teams. I mean, it's long overdue, but it's and ultimately it's just another game. It is the pageantry behind all these New Year's Six bowl games. Those are fantastic. But I got to tell you, something's got to happen with the rest of these bowl games because you can't have this Florida State fiasco that just happened with no – it's a glorified spring game.
Yeah.
Well, it is. So, and they're working on legislation to move the transfer portal. And there's nothing you can do about the guys going to the league.
Yeah,
they're going to hold out, and no, you can't blame them for that. But the transfer portal guys who are picking and choosing and leave, I mean, these other bowl games are just ridiculous. And the funny thing about all that too is, I talked to a gentleman who used to be the president of the Orange Bowl, and he's a consultant on all these other bowl games. He was sharing with me. He goes, you know how much money is generated? I don't care what bowl game it is. You're going to find somebody to cut you a big check, to televise it, to sponsor it. I don't care how little of a bowl game is. There's always going to be bowl games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there is so much happening. You look at NIL, and Keith, we had conversations. Keith and I go back a long time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so I remember you discussing how you were working on NIL and that this was going to happen. And you were totally positioned, ready for this. And when the news broke in early July of 2021, you were off and running. You knew that this was happening probably a couple of years before that. So
Yeah.
tell us about your company, what you do, and also share with us. You started up a specific NIL program at the University of Michigan. I believe it's called Circle of Champions.
Well, that's not Stadium in Maine is the collective that licenses our technology at Playbook.
Okay.
Some backstory. Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
Rick. I'll just jump right in. So my backstory a little bit is I was a writer. I wrote movies for a living. That's I was living in California. I've written a bunch of sports movies.
Okay.
And
Sports movies.
Yeah.
Hey,
Look at you.
Wow.
He was a writer on Whoopi's movie Eddie.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I wrote that. I wrote Mr. 3000 with Bernie Mac, the last Sandlot movie, like Mike, all that stuff. But anyway, the last thing I got paid to write, this is before not this most recent Writers Guild strike. This was 10 years ago. This producer hired me to write a story called 5 Star Kings. And it had to do with the NCAA. I did a terrible job on the script. It never got made. He wanted a comedy and I wrote a drama. But what it did do, and the reason why I'm sharing this with you, it's just how I got to this point. I did a deep dive and learned a lot about the NCAA. This is 12 years ago. And Mark Emmert, I just learned how the sausage was made. Well, cut to many years later, I was living in California. And I ended up creating the world's first online film festival. And that's how I ended up back in Grand Rapids, Michigan. The company back here bought it. But right before I left, the state of California passed legislation. And ironically, they picked 2024 as the first year that the state of California athletes will be able to monetize their name, image, likeness. And this was in 2014 or 15. This was like 8-9 years ago. They just picked an arbitrary year far off in the future. They just wanted... That's how California rolls. They just sign crap and go with God. So I was like, wow, that's interesting. Well, once they announced that, they didn't realize other states across the country, Michigan being one of the first, Texas, Florida, independently state by state started signing legislation and moved it up much quicker. Well, cut to both my kids are college athletes, are going to be college athletes, and had this background in technology with the film festival. I thought, man, it'd be kind of fun if I created like this cameo type just for college athletes. Well, my daughter will be in Wikipedia forever as she is the very first college athlete to monetize her name, image, likeness.
Wow.
And that's kind of funny.
That is pretty cool.
She became TikTok famous by building a she shed during the COVID lockdown, millions of followers, and she's a college volleyball player at an NAIA school, and they passed legislation first. And part of my marketing strategy was, hey, let's get her a brand deal. The second they did, and it got picked up on all the news outlets. So she is the very first college athlete and she's my co-founder in my company, Playbook.
Nice.
And so Playbook is basically it's a platform for fans and brands, and we're an influencer, marketing platform. It's grown not just from a Cameo-esque doing shout outs. We now do Fortune 500 companies, and we built this piece of technology that a bunch of collectives license it. So at some point, maybe not on this show, Rick, I could share with you how, because I was trying to get you guys to do a baseball collective. I thought, would be an interesting idea, but these collectives are just, they're interesting. Let's just say the least. There's some do it right, some don't, some are a mess. But at the end of the day, I'm all about impacting the kids and getting the kids their due. Hey, when I left college, I didn't have no work experience, not a single penny in the bank. I wasn't going to the league. and that terrified me. I literally had nothing. So I did not want my kids to be in the same boat. And that was sort of the spirit behind building. So everything we do has to do with either the kids are benefiting or not. And it's been going fantastic too. It's been a good, interesting ride.
So tell us about what is the vibe with Michigan going into tomorrow's game. You're undefeated. You've had an outstanding year. I think 3 years in a row beating Ohio State. You take down Nick Saban, the SEC, Alabama. It's almost like there's a lot of change happening. You got USC, UCLA, now Oregon and Washington coming to the Big Ten. A lot of change happening. What's the vibe with Michigan going into tomorrow, Keith?
Well, I will tell you, this is what is. I'm just throwing this out there. The officiating crew, I don't know if you've known this about this crew, if you've read this anywhere, but they're the number one crew in the country for calling pass interference calls. By far. They have thrown the flag exponentially more than any other officiating crew.
Are they
I'm calling it right now. Whoever gets the most PIs will win this game. That's my take on it, because these guys, they're just going to chuck it down. I mean, that's it. Just chuck it. And Washington receivers are athletic enough. They'll either
50-50 balls.
They're going to catch it, they're going to get PI, or they're going to drop it. Two of those three things are good. So my take on is if they let them play ball, not throw the flag, I think Michigan's going to be fine. But, I mean, Washington's tough, man. They throw the ball, but they can also get some pressure on Penix. I saw that Arizona State game. Did you guys see that?
Absolutely.
Oof. They didn't look good in that game.
No, that was a 15-7 game. That was a very close game. In fact, I think Washington, like the last 7 or 8 games, have been within 10 points. They've all been close. And we had one of those in the Coliseum, where Michigan's been the opposite.
Yeah.
You guys have worked through all of your opponents. The closest game, I think, being the Ohio State game and Alabama.
Alabama.
Yeah,
and then I think Maryland too. Maryland was a touchdown game, I believe, on the road.
But it wasn't as close as that.
They got close towards the end, right?
Actually, I mean, they've been challenged, but they never had to play from behind.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the first time they had to play from behind was against Alabama, and they kind of stepped up. So that was good. It's all going to come down to who doesn't turn the ball over. That's it. Plain and simple. Who doesn't turn the ball over will win this game.
Now, Michigan has balance. I want to hear it from you, both offensively and defensively.
Yeah.
You got J.J. McCarthy, and you got Blake Corum running the ball with Edwards as well. Yeah. What do you see? I mean, they're very versatile. What do you think is more of the strength of Michigan on offense? Is it passing or running, or it depends on the opponent?
I think the strength of the Michigan offense is the diversity. I mean, they could run the ball 15 times in a row or throw it 15 times in a row. They're going to take what's given to them, plain and simple. And they have weapons. Like against Alabama, they have this Tyler Morris kid who's caught 3 passes all year, scores a touchdown, or maybe it was like 8 passes or something like that. There's a lot of bodies they throw out there, and who can, depth wins too. So if I was, if I had to put together a defensive scheme against Michigan, I would probably make us go over the top. I think that's J.J. McCarthy's weakest point, going deep. Don't give him anything underneath. He's going to pick you apart all day long. Make him go over the top, and then go with God. But that's their weakest link, is they just can't go deep. They don't have any deep threat.
I want to read something for you here and get your take on it, Keith. This was an article by in The Athletic by Ari Wasserman. He's kind of the recruiting guru for The Athletic. Do you read The Athletic at all, Keith?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And this was on Wednesday, January 3rd. And he's all about the star, the star quality.
Yeah.
You have to have blue chip stars in order to even compete in the national championship. And he estimates there's like 15 teams that have a chance every year. So he says Georgia and Ohio State will. High school recruiting is always going to be the backbone for top-notch programs that expect to win a national title every year, regardless of roster and or staff attrition. But the right year with the right circumstances, Michigan and teams built like it can win the national title in today's college football. I wouldn't have said that a year ago or even 6 months ago. Today I am, because of Michigan. And this speaks to how fast college football is changing because of NIL, the transfer portal, conference realignment, and going to the 12-team playoff. Keith, I alluded to it a little bit earlier. There is a specific NIL at Michigan that has helped retain some players that may have gone to the NFL. And those players are critical in this year's Michigan's run to the championship. Speak a little bit about that NIL program at Michigan.
Well, I mean, I can speak to NIL across the country.
Mhm.
I think the transfer portal is more of a – so, look, you have Texas A&M, Florida, school Auburn. These are all schools we do. Auburn's On to Victory is our client. I know the money these guys have raised. They ain't winning crap. So Nell ain't going to win you any ball games. I tell you that right now. I mean, look at Texas A&M. All great programs, great schools. Florida's doing it right, too, with their kids, with their Nell. They're all doing good stuff with it. So, but that ain't – I mean, at Michigan, Blake came back because he could make money now and come off an injury. He wasn't going to – there was some offensive linemen. The thing that has changed – Nil isn't changing who's going to win or lose. I'm just telling you that right now. It's not changing who's going to win or lose. What is changing who's going to win or lose is how the transfer portal now that to me, I think is really cool, because now these kids are in a position to just scratch that itch of, hey, Will Howard, why is he's going to Ohio State for 1 year? That's it's cool for him, cool for Ohio State. Forget about those schools. The other smaller schools like Kansas and things like that are able to compete because you got these kids leaving these big blue blood schools and they just want some PT. So I'm going to go to, Kansas. I'm going to go to Kansas State. The transfer portal is the thing that's really the great equalizer, in my opinion. Even Michigan. I mean, you look at the offensive linemen these guys have gotten the transfer portal the last 2 years. That's why they're where they are right now. I mean, they got some great offensive linemen in it. That Drake Nugent from Stanford, the kid from Arizona State who came in. And to me, I think that transfer portal is the big equalizer.
And Trojans know a perfect example is Malachi Nelson, 5-star quarterback, jumped in the transfer portal because of discussions. Will Howard coming and visiting USC, Miller Moss, being the incumbent. He kind of knew. But then he jumps to Boise State. So there you go. He's going to go to a lesser program, presumably for playing time, to get out there and actually start playing. And he may stay at Boise State the next year, but highly doubtful. He'll probably bump to another team that is going to need a quarterback. And that's where we're at in college football. And everybody's chasing that chance to get into the 12-team playoff next year.
Well, it's going to stabilize a little bit now, too, because that 6th year is done. This is the last year of the COVID year. That COVID year jacked everything up.
Yeah, it did.
Totally did jack everything up.
So that once that is done, it's going to be a little more. The interesting thing that if I'm a high school football player, it's affected some other sports more than football. But these coaches aren't really recruiting out of high school anymore. Their first, food chain is the transfer portal, and then let's go the high school route.
Yeah.
And even then, they're like, do I really want to develop this 5-star? Why don't I let him go somewhere else? Stay in touch with him, and then, hey, hit him up after sophomore year. Hey, Bill, come play with us. So that's just. I've had a handful of conversations with these coaches, and they're all like, some like it, some embrace it. It's just more work for them. These poor coaches, man. It's just a lot more work. That's my biggest fear is the fact that they're making so much. I'm talking to special teams coaches making mid six figures now in college football in D1. But they work their butts off, man. Yeah. They really do. And that would be a job you couldn't pay me enough to do, because it's 7 days a week, all year round, no breaks, recruiting during the season now. You have to recruit in your own locker room now.
Yeah.
And that's tough. That's tough sledding. So.
You have to convince them to stay with the NIL.
Yeah.
Well, there's one player that we'd like to, if you guys win the national championship, he's from Orange County, Mason Graham, number 55.
Yeah, he went off last game.
Yeah, he's a good kid too. He's on the platform.
So,
have you talked to anybody at Tommy Group, Rick?
No, I have not. I have had conversations, not specifically, but I know a couple guys at the Conquest Collective. Murr Hernandez and Jeff McKay, who's J.K. McKay's son. They head up the Conquest Collective, but I don't really know anybody. I haven't had conversations with anybody at Tommy Group or House of Victory. House of Victory is the NIL program that seems to be the most active at USC, but haven't had any specific conversations.
Okay.
Yeah. Speaking of Mason Graham, the other strength of Michigan, I think it's even more so than their offense, is the defense. Total defense points allowed, Michigan's number 1, 10.2 points allowed, and Washington at number 53. Obviously, Washington plays in more of an offensive-minded Pac-12. But give us your take, Keith, on Michigan's defense this year.
These guys just bend, don't break. You know, they can let teams march down the field, but keep them out of the end zone. That's kind of been the whole Michigan attitude ever since I was there too. Bend, don't break. And I think their strong suit is being able to get to the quarterback. And that's where, against Penix, if you can get to him, you can get in his head. And if you just touch him like Max Crosby, he just likes to run by and touch him. You can't get him just so he's in his head.
Right.
Penix has a proclivity for throwing some picks. Getting rattled. And
their offensive line is really good, though.
Yeah, their offensive line is really good, but they weren't better than Alabama's, the number 1 pass defense in the country. So it's whoever can get to the quarterback. The thing that they have, though, is I believe that this Penix could probably scramble better than Milroe. I don't know. Maybe, I'm not sure about that. Yeah.
Well, maybe scramble in the backfield, but when it comes to running downfield and taking the ball,
probably not.
Milroe
accurate from Milroe.
Oh, easily.
Yes, more arm strength than Milroe, and just
more accuracy. Milroe's not a downfield threat.
No.
So
better decision making.
Yeah.
He has better decision making, and he's a lefty. Quite frankly, it's just different. You're going up against a different look.
Yeah.
A lefty is a different, and it kind of can, I don't know, mess with your head.
On a different side and everything.
Right.
He's maybe a little confused a little bit.
So here's where it's going to be interesting, because Michigan defense hasn't faced a quarterback like Michael Penix, and the wide receivers and Washington's offensive line. Michigan's faced Kyle McCord, who's no longer at Ohio State now, Talia Tagovailoa, Drew Aller, Jalen Milroe, and Hudson Carr at Purdue, transfer from Texas. If you look at Washington's defense, they're a little bit more seasoned, facing Caleb Williams, Bo Nix 2 times, Cameron Ward, Quinn Ewers, DJU, and Noah Fafita at Arizona. So Michigan, I think, is going to be in for a surprise. They're going to have to adjust to a quarterback that can throw it downfield to really 3 NFL caliber wide receivers. I don't think Michigan's faced that. But at the same time, Washington's offensive line hasn't faced a defensive line, I don't believe, like Michigan. So that's what there's so many interesting storylines, Keith. And you brought an interesting one as well with the officiating crew. So this is going to be a fantastic game. Hey, I know it's late there, Keith. I really appreciate you coming on, but let's get a score prediction before we let you go.
I ain't gonna give a score prediction. I'm gonna say bet the over.
Bet the over. Okay.
Bet the over. No matter where it lands, bet the over. There's gonna be a lot of scoring back and forth. I feel like this is gonna come down to whoever has the ball last wins. This is what, for whatever reason, it just feels like that type of game. Okay. And I don't know what their special teams is like and what their kicking game is like, but I know Michigan's kicking game hasn't won us anything yet, so they're due. It's either win at something or lose at something. I don't know. It's going to be fun though, man. It's just going to be great. Hey guys, great meeting you. And Rick, good job on this. This is awesome. And just FYI, I am a de facto Trojan fan too. Rick can share with you. Good. Yeah, when I moved to California, the first people I met were a bunch of USC meatheads, and they took me to a football game. So I went to every USC game through the 90s when they were terrible. And that's why I met Rick.
That's true.
But we had a blast.
And I know Keith Mitchell through friend of the show, Jamie Davenport, good friends. And Keith, I really appreciate him coming on. Those out there that are watching live or watching a little bit later, you can find Keith Mitchell at Playbooked. Again, that's the name of his NIL company, and former screenwriter. Keith does it all, and really appreciate you, Keith. We'd love to have you back on the show sometime in the off season to talk a little bit about Michigan and USC getting to the Big Ten. That would be great. Would be unbelievable spending a little bit more time. Appreciate you coming on such short notice. Enjoy the game and go Blue.
Yeah, thank you guys for beating.
Hopefully, Brian. Hopefully, you guys can be talking some USC basketball come March Madness. So we'll talk.
Yeah, we'd like to do that too.
Maybe
we'll see you. Wow.
I don't know too much about the men's going to March Madness, but
yeah, I mean, like you said, hopefully, but not looking good so far.
Yeah. Let's bring on our next panelist, Tony Altimore. Tony Altimore, appreciate you coming on. Everybody knows Tony from the Voice of College Football.
Fight on, guys.
The USC postgame show. The
Fight on, bow down, and go Blue.
Live show. And great to have you, Tony. We just had Keith Mitchell. I think you probably heard him offline, but a lot of great information about how college football is changing, a little bit of information about Michigan and why they are who they are today. I know that you are fans of both Michigan and Washington. Like to have you on. And now, guys, want to go ahead and let's preview this game and give me your thoughts. Blackie Chan, let's start with you. What are some of the interesting things you're looking at from this game, just off the top of your head? And then we'll go to Brandon and we'll go to Tony.
The DBs versus for Michigan versus the wide receivers. That has to be the number one thing that just kind of stands out, because who have they gone against really when it comes to the wide receiver rooms? Like, they've gone against Marvin Harrison Jr., but they also had Kyle McCord as their quarterback. So it's not like they had Michael Penix Jr. throwing to Marvin Harrison Jr., because if they did, then that could be a different game at that point. But can like he said, the bend don't break. Can they not bend enough to with Washington's high-powered offense when they were the number one passing offense in all of the nation? Like, they're going to get their yards, they're going to get their points, but can they stop them enough?
That's the key. Brandon?
Yeah, just to piggyback right what Blackie Chan was saying, that wide receiver DB matchup, I'll be a little more specific. Roman Duze and Will Johnson. I definitely want to see that one. I mean, I'm a fan of both, and got some little ties to Will Johnson. A friend of mine actually trained him. So that's going to be interesting to see, especially with what Keith just told us about the officiator. So that's gonna be the one to keep your eye on, man. It's gonna be a nice battle to see. Two NFL, future NFL guys going head to head. It's gonna be a big one for me.
Tony?
I think this game is going to be fascinating because Michigan is so good, but Washington has enough weapons to make it happen. So I honestly don't know what we're going to see, because the other thing about Washington is that they have had a very enchanting run. I joke about their magical pixie dust that has just saved them time after time after time. And I mean, when you're on a run like this, the most wonderful thing you can have is magical pixie dust, where you find a way to win, and these guys find a way to win. The question is, do they have enough for one more game worth? And I mean, TCU had that last year. When I was on a Michigan show the other day, we were talking about Michigan. Michigan last year just had, they were cursed. It was like the Greek gods, like, Zeus and Hera were like going after them when they played TCU. They should have wiped off the field, and somehow TCU won. So, if Washington has that magic, Washington can get it done, and it's going to be a heck of a game.
Yeah, this game is ripe, man. Speaking of that, I got a little great notion for those who are looking to upgrade their tailgate beer. That's what we do on this show as well. It's called Ripe, Hazy IPA. This game is ripe because one of these teams is going to win their first national championship since the 90s. Washington last winning in 91, Michigan in 97. And these are two great programs from the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, soon to be both in the Big Ten. But as Tony mentioned, and we kind of talked about earlier, it's been 10 games in a row that Washington has found a way to win the close game by 10 points or less, which is pretty phenomenal. So a lot of people think this game is going to come to be a close game. Keith had alluded to their special teams has not won a game yet. Maybe this is going to be it. But this game is going to be a 3 or 4 point game. It's going to be a one possession game. And you got to favor Washington, you would think, in a close game. But something about Michigan,
they're good.
They're amazing, and on both sides of the ball, offensively, defensively, and as Keith mentioned, they've got versatility, so they can run it down your throat 10 times in a row. Can Washington really do that with their running game? We don't know. They really haven't had to do that, and this is a different style of football. So, it's going to be interesting in terms of what's going to happen with this game. Who do you guys give a nod to, or what are your thoughts on the trenches? Because that's what's going to be key here. Who's got the advantage? Let's start with you, Blackie Chan, and we'll go around.
I don't know too much about like the players itself, but Michigan's their defensive line is just, they're beefy. Like they were getting after Jalen. They're the number one. What is it? I forgot what. They're the number one defense in the nation. So it's kind of hard not to give them the nod for that, because you can score on Washington's defense. You can run on them as well. Like we ran on them. So it's going to be Michigan for me.
What do you think, Brandon, in terms of who has the advantage in the trenches?
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, Washington O-line is good, but I would have to get a nod to Michigan on that one. They're a little deeper in the trenches, and I don't know if Washington has the depth to really compete with Michigan on that offensive line, because they're coming all day. They're coming all. You saw it in that Bama game. They're just over and over and over. Next group, over and over and over. They're just all in Milroe's face all game. So, I mean, you can't compare Alabama to Washington. I mean, Alabama's had their struggles on the offensive line all year, but Washington still hasn't seen that type of pass rush all year. So we'll see. It's going to be an interesting one for sure, though.
Tony?
I mean, I think it's Michigan, certainly. They, what they've had to do in the Big Ten season, with due respect to our fellow conference mates, is a lot harder than what they had to do in the trenches against the Pac-12 season. But, if you can throw the ball over the trench, you'll be all right. And they have a quarterback who can do it. at the same time, the question for Washington, I really think in the trenches is not, are they better? Because they're not. It's, are they good enough? Are they going to be good enough to have enough time to throw the ball and watch Udunze or any of those many guys who are going to spend a long time playing on Sundays catch the ball? And if they can, it gets real hard for Michigan, and they got to, defense 101, they got to pull guys back to cover the pass. That opens up more space for the run. That gives you some breathing room in the trenches. So I think it's going to be really incumbent on Washington to be good enough.
This is going to be interesting because you look at Alabama, and I believe Alabama was probably the best team that Michigan has faced all year at that time of the season. But if you remember the beginning of the year, a lot of critics were saying, what's wrong with Alabama's offensive line? And they weren't the same as previous years. And then you wonder what happened with quarterback. Now, granted, they put it together, but Jalen Milroe is not a Pac-12 quarterback. He can run the ball, he can throw the check down or the screen pass, but you let him go ahead and throw it 20 yards down the field, because you know what? 2/3 of the time you'll probably knock down the pass or get an interception, even more so than that. So you take a look at what happened with Michigan versus Alabama's offensive line. And there's a guy that you have to contain, and that's number 55, Mason Graham. Because if you look at the first part of that game, that first drive, they sacked the quarterback. They sacked Milroe 2 times. And the first time they sacked him, they were double teaming Mason Graham. And they were able to get number 17 got loose, I think McGregor, and sacked Milroe. And then Stewart came on another one and was able to get him on 3rd down. So he was a former wrestler, and this guy is a problem because he was in that center's head all game. And he stood that guy up on the last play, 4th and goal in overtime. And there was no push by the offensive line for Alabama. And so they have to figure out Mason Graham, because if they don't, I think Penix is going to be scrambling. And so I give the advantage to Michigan's defensive line. I understand Washington has, the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line, but they haven't faced pressure like they're going to see, and they're going to dial it up. Speaking of Alabama, that leads me to my next question. Do you guys think Nick Saban has lost a little bit off of his fastball? Do you think everything that's kind of happening, all these changes, that maybe he doesn't have much time left?
No.
I'm never counting out Nick Saban.
I mean, he was just in the national semifinal. He's not like falling off.
Well,
I think there is some regression. There's always regression to the mean, but they just beat Georgia and won the SEC.
Well, I'll just say this. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Like I just mentioned this on our show right before we came here. I told you guys a few years ago, there's going to be more parity when NIL hits. And the teams that you see at the top who've been secretly doing NIL all these years, they're going to get caught up with. And things are going to look a little different in college football, or more like what it was in the past. So, and that's what we're seeing. Look what we're seeing in the championship. Who's, teams from the 90s now are in the championship. Teams that we've seen dominate in the past. So that's, Rick, you know, just like I know, with the just follow the money trail, right? We know how.
But at the same time, that's the same thing that happened when they went to 85 scholarships, and Texas and Nebraska and USC couldn't have 850 players on the sideline that they were just hoarding away from the other schools. So, we sort of always we've been in this sort of movement to parity for the better part of 50 years. I think this is a big move towards it. But with the same thing, and Rick and I have talked about this with the SEC overall, there's always cyclical regression to the mean. So, no matter who you are, eventually you come a little bit back to that mean with cyclicality. And so, I wouldn't say that Alabama's out. I wouldn't say the SEC's down, but like you have some regression to the mean always.
Yeah,
See-
I don't think that I'm not saying Alabama's out.
No,
Not at all.
No.
No, I know. I'm not you.
And
But
I think, and here's why I say, or I ask the question: has Nick Saban lost a little bit off his fastball? He's been at Alabama since 2007. There's been a lot of changes, and look at this quote after losing the game. We just didn't finish the last 4 minutes of the game like we'd like to, and we're all very disappointed. But one thing I told them in the locker room: this is one of the most amazing seasons in Alabama football history in terms of where the team came from and what they were able to accomplish. Okay, does that sound like a Nick Saban quote? It's like, go ahead and pass out oranges and high seas to everybody. I told him this is one of the amazing seasons in Alabama football history in terms of what this team came from and what they were able to accomplish. Is he saying that, well, gosh, maybe we shouldn't have been there? We got lucky.
He has said that about other. He's said that about other teams that didn't that finished worse than this team as well. But I just think that when it comes to Nick Saban, he has evolved a lot with each like new way of playing college football has come around. Like he went to the high powered offense with Tua and Jalen. Like he's been able to evolve. So maybe this is just another sign of evolvement for him. Like he's still recruiting at a high level. I was saying all this year that Nick Saban's going to lose due to quarterback play, and I feel like that has happened to him. But like after that first loss to Texas, I thought they were going to go on a more of a downward spiral, but they continued to win and they beat Georgia when I didn't think they were going to beat Georgia.
Well, part of it is Nick Saban. He's gone through a lot of different coaching changes, nothing new, but I was very surprised that he went with 31-year-old Tommy Rees. He hired him as the OC. He tried to get Ryan Grubb from Washington. Ryan Grubb said no. And then, I don't know, he didn't have a 4 or 5 star replacement for Bryce Young. So he had to scramble to get Buckner, the transfer from Notre Dame. He had Jalen Milroe. And we saw what happened earlier in the season, losing to Texas, having their troubles at South Florida. But did they really ever solve the quarterback problem? I mean, you look at a lot of criticism that why Florida State couldn't make it to the national championship game is because of quarterback play, only throwing 55 yards with a third-string quarterback in the ACC championship game. But look at the stats there. Jalen Milroe passed for 116 yards in the Rose Bowl. Really? What does that tell you about their quarterback play? So that's why I asked the question, is Nick Saban, does he lose it a little bit off of his fastball? So because he didn't have Alabama ready.
He does have a good quarterback coming in this recruiting class, though.
Yeah, he has one, but he also has Julian Sand out of Carlsbad, California, and Eli Holstein was the other quarterback, and he just jumped into the transfer portal. So it's kind of showing you're not going to be able to get 2 quarterbacks in the same class. It's not wise. But here's another quote, and Brandon, this kind of Brandon Jones. This is what you're kind of alluding to. Nick Saban says college football is heading towards a semi-pro direction with NIL and the expanded playoff. Now, when Nick speaks, people listen. And he said this late December of this year. We're moving in the sort of semi-pro direction in terms of there's pay for play now. We call it name, image, and likeness, but that's pay for play basically. And I'm all for the players sharing in what's happening. You've got guys transferring from one team to the next at will with very little guidelines as to how to control any of these things. And we're going to have a playoff very similar to the NFL. And I'm not saying any of those things are bad. I'm just saying they're all completely changes from what we had 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever. So, hey, now that everybody can pay the players, now Nick is saying, hey, that's all good and well. But who is he speaking to here, guys?
Donors?
Okay.
You think he's
Zone donors too, I think.
Yeah, he's telling them that they need to pay up so he could do this pay for play now.
maybe so.
The teams that are mainly doing that right now is Texas A&M, Texas, Oregon.
The other thing, by the way, is this is going to keep getting worse until they finally just accept that the
Regulate it.
answer is collective bargaining.
Yeah.
Because the problem is that the courts have just nailed them. They've been clear. You can't just keep making rules that restrict people's income. So the only way you can get this under control, the way you can control your costs and control the spiraling, no rules, no this, transfer tomorrow if you want, is actually with collective bargaining, where the athletes agree to limits in exchange for what they bargained for. Because I'll tell you the other thing that I think is going to fall very, very soon. Haven't heard much talk about it, but if you actually read like the decisions that have been coming down, there's no way that it survives very much longer, is the 4-year limit or the 5-ish year limit or this, whatever you want to call it. Because truly, again, under the justifications that they've used in just smacking the NCAA around one way or the other, the limitations on people's earnings, like you don't tell doctors you can only be a doctor for 4 years anymore. And that's the status that that's the standard that they're using, is what happens in the rest of the world. So I think very soon that's going to go away too. So again, collective bargaining, I think, is really the only way that this problem gets solved. And I think when you hear people complaining about it, like he is right here, just like he did when did he give a speech like a year ago at the Touchdown Club in Birmingham, and he gave essentially the same speech as this.
Right.
He's talking to his donors. He's telling his donors to start writing checks.
And so what I take out of this, guys, is how to control things. Very little guidelines. So I think he's speaking to Greg Sankey, who's probably speaking to Tommy Tuberville, who is the senator from the South there, Republican senator. They're trying to get federal legislation to help with some guidelines to the transfer portal, NIL. Nobody has answers. People are looking for control. As Keith Mitchell mentioned earlier, these coaches are recruiting 24/7. High school players, transfer portal, trying to recruit their own locker room. So the reason why I bring this all up is because we're going to the 12-team playoff. You cannot look at a team from a year or 2 years ago and say, well, they have no chance. Because if you look at 2021, this is a perfect example. Look at the University of Washington. They finished 4-8. Jimmy Lake was fired during the year, and they actually lost to Michigan that year. Were blown out, I think 31-10. 2 years later, they're in the national championship game. You take a look at a school like Arizona. Arizona was 1-11 that year. This year they're 10-3, and they beat Oklahoma, who's going to the SEC. And then last week, that Washington team beat Texas, who's going to the SEC. Beat them for the second year in a row. Last year they beat them at the Alamo Bowl. This year they beat them for the Sugar Bowl. So you can see examples of what is happening with NIL, and it's even getting more and more sophisticated in terms of keeping players at the universities. And then perfect examples, you're getting Malachi Nelson, you're getting these 4- and 5-star players that are transferring, looking for an opportunity to play. And nowhere else, schools like Alabama, Georgia, and the SEC, where you have schools that it's not going to take that long to get to become a college football playoff team. What are your thoughts, guys? I mean, let's take a look at USC. What does USC have to do in order to be successful next year going to the Big Ten? What's going on with USC's NIL?
We have too many Chiefs.
That's a good question.
Too many Chiefs.
Yeah.
Outside looking in, obviously, I'm not in the circle. I don't know, but outside looking in, it just seems like there's too many Chiefs, not enough Indians, man. Everybody wants, their collective to be the collective, and it's really, you see at other schools, it's one collective, that's working together towards one goal. So
I don't get how we haven't been able to pull ourselves together to to be like Florida, be like a Miami. They are trying to make it all one collective, and they're doing it correctly. And we just like seem to be fumbling it here. I don't get how, when we have all the resources to be able to do it.
And I'll be honest, and I know that there's debatable limits to how the school can do this. I think it needs to flow through the school better. The school needs more control. Anytime, like you mentioned, with too many chiefs and not enough Indians, especially when they're not even from your village, it's not a good thing. You need it to be in-house. And I mean, the NCAA has no ground to stand on for anything anyway. So I think you can take a little more liberal. We are still scarred by 2010, and I think we can take a little more liberal interpretation to be more like what's happening, dare I say, in Eugene.
Yeah.
So this is going to be an interesting matchup, as I alluded to earlier. Both teams won their last national championship in the 90s. Michigan leads the all-time series 8-5. They're both 2-2 in the Rose Bowl, with Washington beating Michigan 34-14 to win the 1991 national championship game. One of the things to look at, I think Keith had mentioned, is turnovers. Who is going to make the fewest mistakes? You got two outstanding quarterbacks in Penix and
JJ
McCarthy, and their stats, just to kind of to show the stats. They've got Michael Penix close to 4,700 yards passing, 35 TDs, 9 interceptions. JJ McCarthy doesn't have to pass it as much with a running game like Blake Corum, 2,851 yards passing, 73.2% completion, 22 TDs, 4 interceptions. Doesn't make a lot of mistakes because he's benefited by that running game where, Washington does have a running game, but it's not as consistent. How healthy is that running game going to be? Guys, your thoughts on Washington's offense and Michigan's offense in this game. Start off with you, Tony.
I mean, Penix is better, but Michigan can run, and Michigan has the line to let them run. And so, if Michigan can run the ball all day, it's going to be incumbent on Washington to really do their thing. And the question is, can they do it? And it's going to be interesting to see.
Brandon?
Yep, I agree with Tony. It's going to be interesting to see how Michigan plans on stopping that deep ball. But, they never dealt with the arm like Penix. But Washington has to concentrate on stopping that run and make JJ McCarthy beat him with their arm. That's going to be the key to the game right there.
Blackie?
Yep, I agree with you, Brandon. Like Dylan Johnson, I know we kind of harp on him with they hardly ran the ball all that much, but he's a 1,000-yard rushing running back, so he can run it, and we've seen it firsthand. But it's kind of easy to run against us. But it's just, can JJ McCarthy be the reason why they win the game? Because that Washington's going to try to just stop Blake Corum and the other running back. I can't remember his name, but they're going to try to do everything they can do to stop their running game, because that's what they know their bread and butter is. And we all know that Michigan's going to try to stop their passing attack. And can Dylan Johnson be the reason for that? But just I don't know. I don't have faith that if JJ McCarthy had to go into a shootout with Michael Penix, if he can keep up.
Yeah, I think Michigan would be wise. I think they're going to run the ball. They're going to make Washington stop them. I don't know if Washington can stop the run, right, and give them a heavy dose of Corum and Edwards. And then you throw in passes by JJ McCarthy to keep them honest. But I think Michigan wants to control time of possession, limit the ball in Penix's hands and Washington's hands, because they know they can score fast. The other thing that they got to worry about is how do they cover 3 NFL type receivers, and Ndunze, Polk, and
McMillan.
That's going to be problematic, and that's where their strength is. I think if Michigan runs the ball and just makes JJ McCarthy a secondary part of their offense, and sure, JJ McCarthy can beat you, but if you just run the ball on them and keep the ball away from Washington, I think that's their strength. And then Michigan will take their chances on defense covering that offense when they have limited opportunities. So that's for Michigan to be successful. I think that's what's going to happen.
Yep. I will say it's going to be pretty hard for Penix to get the ball downfield if that pass rush is all in his face all game. So that's going to be pretty interesting, man. So probably see a lot of slants, a lot of quick outs, him getting the ball out early before they can take a shot downfield. But
yep.
So that's going to be pretty interesting to watch too. See if Penix can navigate that pressure.
I think we might see a lot of screen game because they're going to be all out blitzing Penix. So why not just dink it over the top of the lineman? The defensive line.
Yep.
Sergeant Pickle says if Michigan tries to take away the deep ball, Penix will hit the tight ends. So we got to keep an eye on
Did
that.
he utilize the tight ends all that much?
Well, he's going to have to this game. I'm pretty sure they're going to try to take away the deep ball. I'm pretty sure they're going to want to keep everything underneath while getting that.
You have 3 receivers to be able to try to do that too, though.
Yeah. It's not going to be an easy task, but
Sergeant Pickles also says, I see one outstanding quarterback and a slightly worse Bo Nix.
A slightly worse? We have our opinions on Bo Nix, but
listen, I'm not going to disagree with that, Sergeant Pickles. I'm not the biggest fan of JJ McCarthy. I think he's slightly above average in my opinion, but yeah, I hear you, Sergeant Pickles. I hear you.
All right, well, we're going to wrap this up. We got to get some score predictions here, guys. I appreciate you being here on a Sunday evening, the night before the national championship, and great discussion. It's good to have all you in here. Let's start off with Blackie Chan. Tell us, wrap it up here with what you see tomorrow happening in the national championship game and give us your prediction. Don't necessarily have to give us a score, but let us know who you think is going to win.
I'll give you a score since we gave it in our podcast here. I'm going to say 38-28 Washington. I just think that I don't think the DBs for Michigan has seen this caliber of wide receivers, and I trust that Washington's offensive line will do enough to give him at least enough time to stand back there and at least pick them apart. If not, he'll dink it, and then they'll come close to the line, and then he'll toss it over top.
Brandon?
I'm going to say 34-27 Washington. I believe that Penix is going to figure it out. He's going to show everybody that he is a pro. He's going to show everybody that he was definitely snubbed in that Heisman. So, I believe he's going to figure it out and be eager to show the world, man. I think he's got a little chip on his shoulder, so I think he's going to show out.
Tony?
So Washington can win. They may very well win. Would not surprise me in the slightest. But if I had to bet, I think Michigan finds a way. They're good.
Yeah, Washington's a dynamic team. Enjoyed seeing them all year. I think Michigan is the more balanced team defensively and offensively. And I don't think they have an answer for Mason Graham. He's going to be a difference maker. He's going to put pressure on Washington and give the other playmakers on defense their chance to stunt, blitz the quarterback. They might not sack Penix, but they're going to be in his head. They're going to cause him problems all day. And I think Michigan has the better running game. At the end of the day, it's going to be a close game. I see Michigan winning this game. I'm going to call it 28-24.
Oh,
but it's going to be one heck of a game, guys. I really appreciate you joining the show. Tell us where people can find you, Blackie Chan, Brandon, as we wrap up, and Tony.
On a lot of places here. I stream on Twitch, Blackie Chan _gaming, and then same thing for Twitter as well, or X, whatever you want to call it. And you also find me on the Light the Torch podcast with the guy below me, B Jones.
And if you haven't followed Light the Torch podcast, these guys are doing a great job. I believe you guys started out earlier, the beginning of the season.
Yep.
And they've got a lot of great content on there. They're now adding videos on transfer portal guys that USC is recruiting. Always get great content on Instagram. Follow them on Instagram. Brandon, where can they find you?
Like you said, Instagram, it's all right there in front of you. _ at Light the Torch on X or Twitter, whatever you're calling it these days. I'm always there, responsive. So I'm always looking to interact with the fellow Trojans. So hit us up, guys.
And Tony.
You just find me. You can Twitter at TJ Altimore. So right on there. And I got to run, but thank you guys.
All right.
Thank you, Tony.
Fight on.
Guys, fight on. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Blackie Chan.
Fight on, guys.
Fight on.
Thanks for having us.